Imagine a city with walls so wide that two chariots could race side by side on top of them. Walls so thick that the most powerful army on earth would stand outside looking up and then simply turn back home. Now, imagine that all of this, every brick, every tower, every palace, was erected without a single stone. No granite, no marble, no limestone, only mud, water and dry straw taken from the banks of a river. How is it possible that the greatest empire of antiquity was built with the most fragile material on the face of the earth? The answer is so ingenious that modern engineers still study these techniques today. To understand how Babylon was built, you must first understand where it was built, because the location explains everything. We are talking about Mesopotamia, the valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now Iraq. And here is the problem. This region is an alluvial plain. This means there is no rock, there are no mountains, there are no quarries. The ground beneath your feet is mud, deposited by thousands of years of flooding. Anywhere else in the ancient world, when you wanted to build something grand, you went to the nearest mountain and cut blocks of stone. The Egyptians had the quarries of Aswan, the Greeks had the marble of Mount Pentelicus, the Romans had travertine. Nebuchadnezzar had none of that. He had clay. And with clay, he built the largest city the world had ever seen. The secret begins in the kilns. The Babylonians mastered a technique that transformed the most common material on the planet into something nearly indestructible, the fired brick. The process was meticulous. First, workers collected clay from the banks of the Euphrates, a dense clay with high silt content that, when dry, cracked like sunburned skin. On its own, this clay was useless for construction. But the Babylonians mixed in chopped straw and sometimes animal manure to create a fibrous mass that would not crack as it dried. This mixture was pressed into rectangular wooden molds, each brick measuring about 33 centimeters long, 33 wide, and between 6 and 9 centimeters thick, a nearly square format that was the trademark of Babylonian construction. Once molded, the bricks were left in the sun for days until they became hard. These were the sun-dried bricks, and with them, most of the city's common structures were built: houses, internal walls, and warehouses. But for the great works, the walls, the palaces, the temples, Nebuchadnezzar demanded something far superior. The bricks were taken to kilns that reached temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. The heat transformed the clay into ceramic. The result was a block so resistant that archaeologists have found Babylonian bricks from 2,600 years ago that are still intact, with the stamp of Nebuchadnezzar's name perfectly legible on the surface. Think about how absurd that is. A brick made of river mud that has survived longer than most concrete buildings of the 20th century. And here enters a detail that will change your perspective on everything: the mortar. In other civilizations, lime or simple mud was used to join blocks. The Babylonians used bitumen, natural bitumen, a thick, black, sticky petroleum that bubbled up from the ground in the region of Hit, about 150 kilometers northwest of Babylon. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited the city around 450 BC, describes this material with amazement. He reports that the bitumen was boiled and applied hot between the layers of bricks, and that upon cooling it created a seal so strong that it was practically impossible to separate the blocks without breaking them. It was like the superglue of antiquity. This means that Babylonian structures were not simply stacked, they were sealed, waterproof, resistant to water, wind, and time. That is why the walls did not crumble in the floods of the Euphrates. That is why the palaces did not leak during the winter rains. The combination of fired brick and bitumen created a composite material that, in terms of durability, rivaled stone, using nothing but mud and oil. If this surprised you as much as it surprised me while researching, comment, I didn't know, but the raw material is just the beginning. Let's talk about scale, because this is where Babylon stops being impressive and starts being incomprehensible: the walls. Herodotus claims that the outer perimeter of the city was about 90 kilometers long. Now, modern historians believe he exaggerated, likely influenced by the visual impact of seeing it for the first time. Archaeological excavations led by Robert Koldewey between 1899 and 1917 revealed that the actual perimeter of the inner wall was approximately 18 kilometers. Even so, 18 kilometers of continuous wall. To give you an idea, that is larger than the wall that surrounded Rome at the height of the Roman Empire. And it wasn't a simple wall, it was a triple defense system. The first wall, the innermost one, was about 6.5 meters thick. It was made of sun-dried bricks at the core and faced with fired bricks joined with bitumen. Outside of it, there was a space of about 7 meters filled with compacted earth. And then came the second wall, approximately 3.7 meters thick, also made of fired bricks. Together, these two structures created a barrier nearly 18 meters wide. 18 meters, that is the width of a 3-lane highway. Herodotus was not hallucinating when he said that chariots raced on top. There was plenty of room. But wait, outside this double wall, Nebuchadnezzar ordered a monumental moat to be dug, fed by the waters of the Euphrates. The moat was at least 10 meters wide and deep enough to prevent any attempt at tunneling under the walls. In other words, to reach the city, an invading army would first need to cross a water canal, then scale a wall of fired bricks, then cross 7 meters of compacted earth, and then face a second, even more fortified wall. All while defenders shot arrows and poured boiling bitumen from the top of the towers. Every 20 meters along the entire length, there were guard towers that projected outward, allowing archers to fire at the flanks of any enemy trying to climb. There were more than 300 towers in total. Yet here is the detail no one tells you. This entire colossal structure, every one of the millions of bricks, was made by hand. There were no machines, no cranes, no industrial pulleys. Every brick was molded, dried, transported, and positioned by human hands. Archaeological estimates suggest that the construction of Babylon's walls required approximately 10 million fired bricks just for the outer casing. 10 million. If you stack those bricks on top of each other, the pile would exceed the height of Mount Everest. And that is just the casing. The core of sun-dried bricks multiplies that number several times over. The logistics required to produce this quantity of bricks is staggering. Thousands of workers collecting clay from the riverbanks, thousands cutting and mixing straw, thousands molding and drying, thousands operating kilns that needed constant fuel. Wood and reeds brought from distant regions because trees were scarce on the Mesopotamian plain. Thousands transporting finished bricks to the construction site. And thousands positioning each block with hot bitumen, layer by layer, meter by meter. It is estimated that the workforce involved in the construction of Babylon during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II between 605 and 562 BC reached hundreds of thousands of people. Many of them were deportees, conquered peoples forced to work for the glory of a king who had destroyed their cities. Among them were Jews captured during the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. When Psalm 137 says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept," it is very possible that some of those who wept had their hands covered in mud and bitumen. If you can imagine the pain of these workers building with their own hands the glory of the empire that destroyed their homeland, comment, "God is faithful." Now let's enter the city, because the walls were just the shell. What Nebuchadnezzar built inside them would make any visitor of the ancient world question if they were still standing in reality. The Ishtar Gate. If there is a single monument that captures Nebuchadnezzar's insane ambition, it is this one. The main ceremonial entrance to the city was a structure approximately 14 meters high, equivalent to a 4-story building, entirely covered with glazed bricks in a deep blue, a blue so intense that it shone under the Mesopotamian sun as if it were made of liquid sky. Against this blue background, rows of animals in relief, bulls and dragons, molded in gold and white bricks, advanced in a silent procession along the walls. There were 575 animals in total. Each one was modeled individually, every detail of the muscles, scales and horns sculpted by hand before being glazed and fired in the kiln. The visual effect was hypnotic. Visitors approaching through the processional way, an avenue 250 meters long, also flanked by walls covered in blue, yellow and white glazed lions, had the sensation of walking among living creatures frozen on the wall. And here is the technical genius. How do you create a brilliant blue glaze 2,600 years ago? Chemical analysis of brick fragments from the Ishtar Gate, now displayed at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, revealed that the Babylonians used a combination of copper, cobalt and tin in specific proportions, fused with silica at temperatures exceeding 1050 degrees. The result was a ceramic glaze, basically colored glass fused to the surface of the brick. The same technology we use today in sophisticated tiles and tableware, only they did it 26 centuries before the Industrial Revolution. The processional way that led to the Ishtar Gate was no ordinary street. The pavement was made of large limestone slabs. Yes, here stone finally appears, but imported from hundreds of kilometers away, likely from the mountains of Assyria or Anatolia. Each slab had an inscription on the underside, invisible to those walking over it, which read, "Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon am I, the processional way of Babylon." I paved with slabs for the procession of the great Lord Marduk. He signed his name beneath every stone, even where no one would ever read it. This level of obsession with his own glory tells you everything you need to know about the man who built this city. Now cross the Ishtar Gate and enter the heart of the city. To your left, the southern palace, Nebuchadnezzar's primary residence. Coldaway's excavations revealed a complex of 5 successive courtyards, each leading to more restricted and more luxurious areas. The throne was in the innermost courtyard, in a room whose walls were decorated with the same blue glazed bricks, featuring palmettes, lions and floral patterns. The floor was made of polished bricks. The ceiling was supported by cedar beams imported from Lebanon, the most valued wood in the ancient world, the same cedar Solomon used in the Temple of Jerusalem. The prophet Daniel knew this room. When Daniel chapter 4 describes Nebuchadnezzar walking through the royal palace and saying, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence?" it is very likely he was looking out from this exact spot. But here comes something few realize. Nebuchadnezzar did not build only to live. He built to dominate psychologically. Every architectural detail was calculated to crush the visitor with a sense of insignificance. The corridors were narrow and then opened into massive courtyards, creating a disorienting contrast. The walls were too high for the human scale. The animals in the reliefs were larger than life-size. Ambassadors from conquered nations, including vassal kings of Judah, were forced to walk down the processional way, pass by the 120 glazed lions that seemed to roar from the walls, cross the cold shadow of the Ishtar Gate with its golden dragons, and traverse courtyard after courtyard while silent guards watched them until they finally knelt before the throne. By the time they arrived, they were already psychologically defeated. This was not just architecture, it was psychological warfare molded in brick and enamel. And prepare yourself, because now we go to the most controversial and fascinating structure in all of Babylon, something historians have debated for centuries, which appears on every list of the wonders of the ancient world, but which no archaeologist has ever found with absolute certainty. The Hanging Gardens. You have probably seen illustrations of the hanging gardens of Babylon, tiered green terraces, cascading waterfalls, lush trees sprouting from stone structures in the middle of the desert. It is one of the most iconic images of antiquity. But the reality is more complicated and more interesting than any illustration. First, the problem. Herodotus, who visited Babylon and described the walls in impressive detail, never mentions the gardens. No known Babylonian inscription, and Nebuchadnezzar loved to boast of his constructions, makes direct reference to them. The most detailed descriptions come from later Greek and Roman authors. Berossus, a Babylonian priest who wrote in Greek around 290 BC, Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, and Philo of Byzantium. All were writing centuries later. This has led some historians, such as Stephanie Dalley of Oxford University, to propose that the gardens might not have been in Babylon at all. Perhaps they were in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, built by Sennacherib, a century before Nebuchadnezzar. But let's look at what the sources describe, because even if the exact location is debated, the engineering described is real and verifiable. According to Diodorus, the gardens were a series of elevated terraces built over stone vaults, a stepped structure that rose like a pyramid, with each level recessed from the one below. The base would have been about 120 meters on each side. Each terrace was waterproofed with layers of reeds mixed with bitumen, then a double layer of fired bricks joined with gypsum, and on top of that, lead plates to prevent soil moisture from penetrating the structure below. Over these layers, enough soil was deposited for large trees to take root. Strabo mentions trees with trunks 3.6 meters in circumference growing on these terraces. Now think of the engineering challenge. You are trying to create an artificial forest suspended in the air in a region where temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius in the summer, where evaporation is brutal, and where every drop of water must be lifted against gravity to the top of the structure. How do you irrigate this? The sources describe what appears to be an Archimedes screw system, helical cylinders inside tubes that, when turned by human labor, lifted water from the Euphrates to the upper level of the gardens. The water then flowed down by gravity, irrigating each terrace in a cascade. Workers worked in continuous shifts, turning these mechanisms day and night. The amount of water needed to keep trees alive in that climate was monumental. It is estimated that at least 37,000 liters per day would be required. 37,000 liters lifted manually every single day without fail, or the plants would die in a matter of weeks. And why build something so absurdly difficult to maintain? Tradition says that Nebuchadnezzar ordered the construction of the gardens for his wife Amytis, a Median princess who missed the green mountains of her homeland and felt suffocated by the flat, arid landscape of Babylon. If this is true, Nebuchadnezzar literally moved nature to please a woman. He built artificial mountains. He brought forests from where there were no forests. He inverted gravity to make water rise, all because his wife was homesick. If you agree that the power of the kings of this world is nothing compared to the power of God, comment, "Only God is sovereign." Now let's move to what was perhaps the most important structure in all of Babylon. Not the most beautiful, not most famous, but the one that explained why all of this existed, the Etemenanki. The name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It was the great ziggurat of Babylon, a stepped tower dedicated to the god Marduk that dominated the city's skyline. And many scholars believe it is the historical basis for the Tower of Babel described in Genesis 11. Nebuchadnezzar did not build the Etemenanki from scratch. He restored and expanded it. The original structure was much older, possibly dating to the 2nd millennium BC, and had been destroyed and rebuilt several times. It was Nebuchadnezzar who gave it its final dimensions. According to the Isagila tablet, a cuneiform text detailing the measurements of Babylon's religious complex, the Etemenanki had a square base of approximately 91 meters per side. 91 meters. That is nearly the width of a football field. The total height is debated, but the text suggests it was equivalent to the width of the base, meaning about 91 meters high as well. 7 stepped floors, each smaller than the one before, rising like a staircase to the sky. At the top, a temple covered in brilliant blue glazed bricks, visible from miles away, floating above the city like a fragment of heaven that had descended and become stuck. Herodotus describes that inside the top temple there was only a large, richly decorated bed and a golden table. No statue, no idol. The priests claimed that Marduk himself descended and slept there. The ziggurat was not a temple where humans went to worship. It was a ladder where a god descended to visit. This inversion is theologically fascinating and directly echoes the text of Genesis. Let us build a tower whose top reaches to the heavens. It was not purposeless architectural megalomania. It was a literal attempt to build a bridge between earth and the divine. The construction required an absurd number of bricks. Estimates suggest over 17 million for the core of the structure alone. The core was of sun-dried bricks, and the outer casing, several meters thick, was entirely of fired bricks laid with bitumen. Koldewey's excavations found only the base, a swampy depression where the structure once stood, with remains of bricks and bitumen. Alexander the Great, upon conquering Babylon in 331 BC, ordered the demolition of the ziggurat with the intention of rebuilding it even grander. He died before even completing the removal of the debris. 10,000 men worked for 2 months just to clear the rubble, and they did not fish. Think of the irony. The same kind of ambition that made Nebuchadnezzar raise the tower was what made Alexander try to surpass it, and both died before seeing their plans completed. Genesis 11 is not just telling an ancient story, it is describing a pattern that repeats in every civilization that tries to touch the sky with its own hands. But Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was not made only of monuments, and this is where most documentaries stop. They show the Ishtar Gate, the Hanging Gardens, the ziggurat, and that's it. But a city of possibly 200,000 inhabitants does not survive on monuments, it survives on infrastructure. And Babylon's infrastructure was as impressive as its palaces, perhaps more so. And now comes a detail that will shock you. Babylon had a sewage system, that's right. Covered drains ran beneath the main streets, channeling waste away from residential areas. Excavations revealed ceramic pipes, fired clay pipes fitted into one another that conducted wastewater from the wealthier homes to canals that emptied into the river, downstream from the city. While European cities would throw waste out the window for the next 2,000 years, and while 19th century London was still dumping raw sewage into the Thames, causing cholera epidemics, Babylon, in the 6th century BC, was already separating clean water from dirty water. The wealthier neighborhoods had private bathrooms with rudimentary flushing systems. Water poured from containers that carried waste through sloped pipes to the main drains. The water supply system was equally sophisticated. The Euphrates crossed the city from north to south, dividing it into 2 halves connected by at least one stone bridge, one of the first permanent bridges in history. Secondary canals branched off from the main river like veins, distributing water to different neighborhoods. Sluice gates controlled the flow. They could be opened or closed to regulate the water level in the internal canals, prevent flooding, or direct irrigation to the agricultural fields surrounding the city. The main streets of Babylon followed a surprisingly regular layout, almost a grid, with wide avenues cutting the city from north to south and east to west. Common houses were built of sun-dried bricks, with internal courtyards that served as the center of family life. The model was simple but efficient, rooms around an open courtyard that provided light and ventilation. The external walls were blank, no windows to the street, for privacy and thermal protection. In the Mesopotamian summer, where temperatures exceeded 50 degrees, these thick mud brick walls functioned as natural insulation, keeping the interior up to 15 degrees cooler than the outside. At night, many families slept on the flat roofs, where the river breeze brought some relief. The houses of the wealthy had 2 stories, polished brick floors, walls plastered with white gypsum, and doors made of imported wood. Some had domestic chapels, small altars where the family made daily offerings to their protective gods. Religion was not something practiced only in temples. It permeated every corner, every house, every decision. When Daniel and his companions were taken captive to this city, the cultural shock must have been overwhelming. Coming from Jerusalem, an important city, yes, but incomparably smaller and simpler, they found themselves immersed in a metropolis that seemed designed to prove that the gods of Babylon were superior in everything, and that was exactly the intention. Every glazed brick, every golden lion, every meter of wall was a theological argument. Nebuchadnezzar was not just building a city, he was building a proof that Marduk was the supreme god, that Babylon was the center of the universe, that no other god, no other people, no other king could compare. The Book of Daniel captures this conflict with surgical precision. When Nebuchadnezzar erects a golden statue 27 meters high and orders everyone to bow down before it, he is not just being arrogant, he is using the same architectural language he used in everything: size, scale, precious material, visual domination. The statue was just another Babylonian construction, only this time it demanded not just admiration, but worship. And 3 young Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, looked up, saw that golden colossus shining under the Mesopotamian sun, heard the music of the instruments calling everyone to worship, and said no. On that plain of Dura, surrounded by a city that had been designed for decades to prove that their god was irrelevant, 3 captives said they would rather face the fiery furnace than bend the knee. And Nebuchadnezzar, the man who moved rivers, who built artificial mountains, who constructed stairs to heaven, discovered that there was something he could not build nor destroy. The faith of those 3 men was not made of brick. It did not melt in the furnace, it did not crack under pressure, and it could not be demolished by a royal decree. All of Babylon's engineering, every brilliant technique, every surprising innovation we have seen so far, served a purpose that the builder himself did not fully understand. Nebuchadnezzar built the most impressive city of the ancient world. God used it as the setting for one of the Bible's greatest lessons. No empire made by human hands lasts forever. The prophet Isaiah, writing even before Nebuchadnezzar was born, declared in Isaiah 13, "Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the pride and glory of the Babylonians, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah." And Jeremiah adds, "Babylon will be a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, an object of horror and scorn, a place where no one lives." Today, if you visit the archaeological site of Babylon, 85 kilometers south of Baghdad, you will find exactly that. Mounds of reddish earth where palaces once stood, muddy depressions where the ziggurat was, fragments of bricks with Nebuchadnezzar's name scattered on the ground like confetti from a party that ended 2,600 years ago. The city that was built with mud has returned to mud. But the story it tells about human ambition, brilliant engineering, imperial arrogance, and divine sovereignty, that has not turned to dust. That is alive, is here, and it is speaking to you now. If this video impressed you, leave a like now so more people can know this story. And click on the video appearing on your screen. I guarantee it will surprise you even more.